Michigan could have been a heck of a lot better in 2024 if one thing worked a lot better than it had. That is, well, one side of the ball. That's offense. Michigan's going to look a lot different this year, given all of the changes, whether it's Bryce Underwood and Mikey Keene at quarterback, Chip Lindsey at offensive coordinator. Let's get into the highs and lows of what we can expect in 2025 with the Michigan offense right here on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Thursday. We are back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. Again, doing one of two episodes today, if you don't count the roundtable, which I'm not a part of this week. That makes 3 episodes today. But let's get to the Michigan offense. It obviously faltered greatly last year with Kurt Campbell leading the charge. He is off to the Los Angeles Chargers as an offensive analyst. Davis Warren still exists in the building as he recovers from his lower leg injury sustained in the ReliaQuest Bowl against Alabama. But Alex Orji is gone. Anthony Arnoux, I guess, is somewhere. Jayden Denegal is also gone. So it is a new look quarterback room. There's several players who have obviously moved on, whether that's Kalel Mullings, Donovan Edwards, whether that's Colston Loveland, who was the star of the show, and Josh Preeb and Miles Hinton on the offensive line. Dom Judice leaves via transfer portal. Some other guys who were somewhat expected to partake. Andrew Gentry, maybe Raheem Anderson. Those guys are gone as well. So there's a lot of restructuring that's going to be happening this upcoming season in terms of the look of what this offense is going to be. So segment 1, we are going to get into kind of the starters. We're doing the same kind of thing that we've done with the individual positions, but we're going to be looking more broadly now. So first off, let's look at the new look that is going to be happening here. Chip Lindsey brings in his offense, a lot more balanced, obviously a lot more pass happy. Certainly when you have quarterbacks who can make downfield passes, that's going to help things out. Say what you will about Mikey Keene. He at least has shown at the FBS level that he can throw, and he can do so at a high clip. It's not necessarily like some crazy percentages yards, but it is in terms of percentages. Throws for about 70% generally, but not necessarily throwing for like 5,000 yards or anything like that. But certainly he is a guy who can lead an offense. But obviously we all want to see Bryce Underwood. That is the big name that we are hoping to see sooner rather than later, and it's all going to depend on how quickly he can grasp the idea of making calls at the line, protections, reading defenses, and things of that nature. It has nothing to do with physical development. He is already there. He already looks the part. He looks like a guy who you could count on as a senior in college, let alone a freshman in college. So it's there's a lot of upside there. The fact that Chip Lindsey comes in after a track record of, hey, I got to develop Drake May. Drake May says he absolutely did that. You have to keep in mind that is a very important thing, right? The fact that Drake May didn't go to the NFL and say, I kind of felt like things were going better for me or whatever. And I know people will say, well, what do you expect him to say? We've seen like when guys get to the pros, they can be maybe a little mum about their college coaches and everything, but that's not what Drake May did. Drake May actually even, I believe, talked to Sharon Moore about Chip Lindsey before the hire. And that's vouching, right? That's like, okay, yeah, this is a guy that you won't really want. And he's going to look at the personnel. He says he's going to look at the personnel and fit the offense around what they have, not what he wants it to be. So that's already good. You look at the running backs. You feel really good about Jordan Marshall and Alabama transfer Justice Haynes. That's a great 1-2 punch. The question ends up being, who are going to be those other guys that end up coming in? Is it Ben Hall? Is it Micah Capana? We'll get to the reserves more in segment 2, and then freshmen in segment 3 that could potentially contribute. But wide receiver is, to me, one of the 2 big question marks, because I think you look at the offensive line, you look at wide receivers. It's great that they've got quarterbacks. Is the lack of receiving, is it on the wide receivers? Is it on the quarterbacks? And my answer to that is probably yes. But from talking to people who kind of have a knowledge of how things were going inside the building, it kind of fell more on the quarterback than it did the receivers, from what I understand they believe inside. Schembechler Hall. So still, I mean, that's a big question. They got the 2 transfers. I know no one's writing home about Anthony Simpson. I think you should. He's been productive, and he's a guy who absolutely can. He's the most productive wide receiver Michigan has. That's the big thing that you can, out of anyone that's going to be there, he's the most productive guy that Michigan's got on the roster. But then Donovan McCulley, who was shown it in the Big Ten with an Indiana team that wasn't very good at the time. He was on the leading receiver in Tom Allen's last year there, but still a big target. And then you add in the guys that they already have. We've talked a lot about Fred Moore, and my hope that Fred Moore ends up being kind of a force, ends up being that guy. Can Amarian Walker stay healthy? Can he, because he's not only one of the tallest receivers, he's also the fastest. So that's a big thing that Michigan needs to try to figure out is, can they get him healthy? Can they make everything between the ears kind of work out where it's like, okay, like you understand what you're supposed to be doing. Can you come down with the contested catches? Can you do those things? Samaj Morgan, can they use him as more of an AJ Henning type, right? Like we saw him more going downfield somewhat this year. Again, had some injury concerns, didn't really get as utilized. Can they use him in, I don't really know if Chip Lindsey loves jet sweeps or not, but can they use him more in that type of game? Can they do the same with name is escaping me suddenly. I know they've got a lot of people there that have potential but not production. Can Amarian Stewart, can Channing Goodwin take a big step forward? It's kind of a bare bones room to some degree. Offensive line, that's also a big question mark for me. I'm excited about Juan Castillo coming in as an analyst now that the analyst can work directly with the players. That's a big change, remember. We want to see Giovanni El-Hadi and Evan Link get significantly better than they were. Greg Crippen, at least a modicum of improvement. He wasn't bad last year. It wasn't anything to write home about, but your offensive line is going to tend to go as your center does. So can he get better year over year? Keeping in mind last year was his first year really playing college football. And then is Andrew Sprague really ready? And then who else is going to come in? Is it the transfer Lawrence Tatar? There's all kinds of permutations along the offensive line because they're going to say, we're looking for the best 5. So that's the big thing. And then the last part that we want to get to is the tight ends. Who do we think is going to start there? It's going to be, I'd imagine Hogan Hansen will be the guy who catches the most passes out of that room, but Marlon Klein will probably play the most snaps. I would like to see it go more Marlon Klein because he's got more, I don't want to say more upside. Hogan Hansen might have a higher ceiling, but with everything that they've said about Marlon Klein and his athleticism and all of that, I just would like to see him be more consistent and be a bit better. So we'll see. Let's talk about the other guys, the reserves. Who can be the guys who come in and play a part? We'll get a little bit more into the offensive line, some of the questionable names that we have in general, and then we'll talk about the freshmen in segment 3. We'll get to all of that here in just a moment. But before we do, attention Locked On Wolverines fans, the future of college sports is here and it is transparent. Before the Roy app, NIL negotiations often happened under the table and fans didn't have a clear way to directly support the athletes that they love. Now with Roy, you get to be a part of the change and support Michigan athletes in the most transparent way possible. Roy, the NIL app allows you to choose the player you want to support, how much to contribute, receive exclusive content from the athletes you back. The best part, if your player transfers, you get your money back. It's a risk-free way to show your support. The Roy app is giving fans control, no more uncertainty. Now you can provide transparent, impactful support and help shape the team and future of college sports with your contributions. Download the Roy app now from the App Store and start backing Michigan athletes the way they deserve with transparency, trust, and a real impact. This is the future of college sports. Join it now by downloading Roy and supporting your favorite players. It's really raining out there. It's apparently scared a little puppy who's sitting under the desk now. She was never a scaredy cat. It's kind of funny to see Zuri just like, oh no, it's raining, and I don't know what that's all about, so I'm going to come hide. And she still is the dog that barks at fireworks. And July 4th, I took her down to Silver Lake where they shoot the fireworks off here in Fenton. And she barks at them. She loves fireworks. She was going nuts. When she hears like something that sounds like a gunshot, I'm assuming there's not gunshots down here. But when she hears something that sounds like a gunshot, she gets all excited. But certain things, she used to bark at thunder. Now she doesn't. Now she's scared of it. And apparently now she's scared of rain. Isn't that right, 30? She doesn't know what to do about it. All right. God bless you all today as we continue on our offensive trek. Lots of names that I'm curious to see. Can they step up? The number one guy that I'm interested in, we kind of went over this early in the week, is Nathan Afobe, offensive tackle. I think if he can come in, now he's entering year 3, if he can come in and live up to his potential, I think that changes the game for the offensive line. Why do I say that? Well, obviously, Lawrence Tatar can play a part coming from Ferris State, 5th year and all of that. But 3rd year Nathan Afobe should be ready for prime time, right? Year 3 is generally when you're kind of looking at offensive linemen and saying, can you do it? Now, he didn't even beat out Evan Link, who had pretty close to a disastrous year minus the last couple games. Last 3 games, I think Evan Link played pretty well. But I would still like to see Evan Link inside. So could the offensive line end up being Nathan Afobe, Evan Link, Greg Crippen, Giovanni El-Hadi, and Andrew Sprague? That would be exemplary. Andrew Sprague, we got 1 game, played really good in that game. 2nd year guy now, right? This was his freshman year, but certainly did not look like he didn't belong playing against Alabama, right? You can see that happening from time to time. The Caden Proctors of the world, what's his name, Justice Terry, some of those guys that I don't think that's the right guy. The Colorado offensive lineman who played his freshman year, right? It's college football is a little bit different now. You can have freshman linemen play. It's just not the ideal. But if not Nathan Afobe, I also have my eyes on the 2 freshmen. Again, we'll talk freshmen in segment 3. But I think that he could completely change the game as far as that's concerned, right? Because he could be the guy that really, if he takes a big step forward this offseason, it could change the complexion of what Michigan's trying to do up front. And it'll just be interesting to see, right? So there's that. As far as just kind of looking at different positions, wide receiver, I think that the freshmen, because again, we don't have a lot of names. So it's you look at the transfers, you look at the players we just said. To me, it's more of the 2nd year guys. We've talked about, receivers tend to end up going, season 1, freshman year, very little. Sometimes you see a little bit of impact more at the end of the year, unless you're just in a season like Michigan 2017, where they had to throw Tariq Black and Donovan Peoples-Jones to the woods. But remember, Nico Collins, he came in late in the season, didn't really do much of anything. And then the next year, 2018, it was okay, this dude is an absolute beast. Now, much different body type than either Channing Goodwin or Amarian Stewart, but can one of those guys take a big step forward? Again, smaller, shiftier type of player, right? I don't really know much about their speed, but certainly played really well in the high school level. So they can play, they can ball, right? That's like we say about the wide receiver position. These guys can catch footballs. It's just that we haven't necessarily seen it too much. Can Peyton O'Leary actually live up to the promise? Huge catch against Ohio State. Big touchdown against, was it Oregon? Outside of that, really nothing to really show for his entire career, aside from the spring game. Speaking of Ben Hall. Ben Hall bursts out on the scene freshman year, spring game. Everyone's like, holy crap, this guy ran for 100 and something yards. He looks like he is absolutely ready for prime time. Only to kind of just disappear this last year. And then and then when he finally gets his shot against Alabama in the ReliaQuest Bowl, it's not him, it's freshman Jordan Marshall that ends up doing a lot more. But he's going to have a challenge on his hands with Micah Kapana, who enters year 2 and certainly can be a really good change of pace back, more speed as far as Kapana is concerned. But even though he's a late enrollee, I'm looking at Jasper Parker as a guy that can absolutely be that guy. Tight end, can Brady Prescorn? Can he, in year 2, really take that big step forward? I just as much want to see Deacon Tonielli entering year 3. Dude, where have you been? Brady Prescorn, you could at least say, okay, there was some injury stuff going on. It's his first year. But I mean, Hogan Hansen broke in and ended up playing a fair amount. And Brady Prescorn has kind of declined from junior year of high school to this point. So can he find that extra gear and get into it, right? That's the next thing. And then obviously the quarterback position, it's how fast can Bryce Underwood become a factor? Those are the things. Those are all basically the names that I'm mostly looking at, with very little deviation in terms of who else can play a part. But if any of those, because here's the thing, someone is going to step up. And even though last year it didn't really kind of materialize that same way, generally on pretty good teams. And I think this has the potential to be a pretty good team. I think at least now you've got the alignment with coordinator and scheme. And I think you've got a couple different game changers like Bryce Underwood. I think that what that does for you is it allows others around you to get better. And I think that that certainly can change the game to some degree. So I'm very curious to see what happens as far as who takes that step forward. I think it might be more of one of those maybe starters. Like Fred Moore might not necessarily be a starter right out the gate like he kind of was this last year, but I think that he's a type of dude where it's just like this guy came as if from out of nowhere, right? And again, we'll look to the transfer portal too in the spring, to see is there anyone that they feel like that can really help the team. Does Skylar Bell re-enter the transfer portal and does Michigan go get him? That could change the calculus in a hurry. Is there someone else? Is there a bigger name that decides to enter the transfer portal in the spring? That's also a possibility. It happens. And can Michigan find the right fit? Because that's the big thing. Michigan's looking for fit just as much as it is looking for everything else. So I'm curious about all of those things. But obviously, too, the freshmen can play a big role in what happens. And there are freshmen that Michigan has that could absolutely vie for playing time and change the game as well. Let's talk about the freshmen that I think can play an impact in 2025. We will do that here in just a moment. But before we do, life moves fast, especially when you have a family. One day you're watching your kids take their first steps, and before you know it, they're off to college. That's why securing their future is so important. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it simple to get term life insurance that fits your family's needs. With Fabric, you can apply for term life insurance online right from your couch. You should be covered in under 10 minutes, and in many cases, no health exam is required. With the peace of mind that you get as a parent, you can make sure your family is financially protected no matter what happens. Fabric can give you that peace of mind. Plus, with affordable coverage, you can get $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. So protecting your loved ones does not have to break the bank. So join thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. That's fabric.com/lockedoncollege. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health concerns. All right, the freshmen. As much as I want to say the early enrollees have an early, they've got an inside track, and they do. That's not necessarily the be all end all, right? What freshmen we saw this last year, some of them were early enrollees. I don't believe all of them were, but generally, like you think of like a Chris Evans, who was a guy who showed up in fall, or showed up in summer, really, but it's not always a prerequisite to be an early enrollee. Rashawn Gary, freaking nature guy. It helps you get ahead of the curve, but they can certainly find ways to break in early too. That's where like a guy like maybe like Elijah Dotson, who is not an early enrollee, but can be around the program due to proximity, can't partake in practice, but can certainly, go to meetings and get some, I think, and get some, certainly like start to kind of get some idea of what he's supposed to be doing. That can help him. But the early enrollees are really where we're going to look for the most part. And Jasper Parker is the other one, right? And that's like, again, the Chris Evans thing makes you think like running backs. You kind of tend to see more freshman running backs because they can just kind of have that it factor. But really, to me, it's obviously the wide receivers. I don't know about Jacob Washington. I know that he had his Army All-American or Navy All-American game, whatever it was. But I don't know if he was an early enrollee or not. To be honest, it's harder to kind of keep track of these things as it once was. I know other sites kind of do. I'm just not as good at it. But the other two we do know are, and that's Andrew Marsh and Jamar Browder. I know Marsh fell down the rankings to some degree, and there's that. But I do think that you can look at Andrew Marsh and say, like, he absolutely has that ability to be someone who can step up in year one, slot receiver type, a little bit bigger, right? He's 6 foot. He's not like completely small, but he's not like the giant behemoth type. I could see him, and I think everyone does, as a guy that could be an early beneficiary. Is he going to be a Ryan Williams or a Jeremiah Smith? I don't think so, but he could be a guy that I wouldn't be surprised if he had 300-400 yards in this offense in year one. Jamar Browder, again, quizzing along with Shamari Earls kind of feels like, okay, he can be a guy that really steps up in year 1, too. Not highly ranked, but Michigan apps. I know Sharon Moore absolutely fell in love. This was like one that Sharon Moore like identified and said, that's a guy I gotta have. Guy who was previously committed to NC State. He's like 6'4", 6'5", absolute behemoth. You see him in uniform and you're like, I did not know that wide receivers could be that big, because we are accustomed to Michigan not having wide receivers that are that big. And to have a guy like that can come in and make a play, I think is absolutely huge for the Wolverines. Eli Owens, I think, is not necessarily going to play a big part, but I think you're going to see him quite a bit as being the heir apparent to Max Bredesen. I think for that reason, they're going to try to get him on the field, with this being Max Bredesen's final year, just to kind of get him acclimated. Might just be 4 games. I think you're going to see him, though. The offensive tackles is where I kind of want to settle in for a minute. Because even though I do not think that it is likely, even though they're 5 stars, that we're going to see Andrew Babalola and Ty Haywood, Babalola, by virtue of being an early enrollee, does have a little bit of an inside track. He is already like 300 pounds. 5-star guy is just starting to kind of scratch the surface of his capability. I could see it being a situation where he's just so good and so already just like kind of what they need, that they're like, we're going to take our lumps a little bit and see what we can do with this guy early, which could, again, push out a Nathan Afobe, could, and push Evan Link inside, or just could full on replace Evan Link. Right? Like, that's the kind of the thing. Ty Haywood, NIL special. Sharon Moore also fell in love with him very early in the process, and then made it like, I will not lose this guy. I need to make sure that I get this guy. Fell down the rankings slightly, went from 5-star to high 4-star on most sites after being a 5-star on most sites. But again, is the type of guy as a freshman that could absolutely find his way into the lineup. Wouldn't necessarily fully count on it, but it is possible. And I think that kind of could also change the calculus of what happens, right? They have a lot more options, I feel, at the offensive line position. Nothing is particularly like, okay, here's your obvious scenario, but they've got options. Wide receiver feels a little bit more murky. And then the other positions, for the most part, feel like they're kind of set. Bryce Underwood is the obvious one that we'll just touch on to kind of close out here. He's going to play. Is he going to start right away? I'd say it's about 50-50, right? They brought in Mikey Keene to compete with him. And you know what? He could be like, yes, he's going to have to learn to make the calls, read defenses and stuff like that. Is there a chance that he's just so good regardless that you're like, okay, it's still a work in progress for him, but like, we can't afford to not play this guy? That is absolutely a possibility. Now, you don't want to put him in a situation where he's going to be throwing picks and losing confidence and stuff like that, right? You still want to keep him confident. You still want to kind of, I think, try to work him in. The good news is he's got all spring going up against Wink Martindale's defense and all of that stuff that is going to help him out, right? He's going to be seeing something a lot different than playing, Novi Central Catholic or whatever other schools Belleville plays, Howell, right? Like, he's going to have a much Celine and all of those types of things. It's going to be a much different scenario for him to be going up against an NFL defensive coordinator, and that is just going to help him improve that much better. On top of it, he's got a guy in Chip Lindsey who also knows what it's like to work with high schoolers, right? Because he comes, he's not, before he became like this prolific offensive coordinator in college at Auburn and UCF and North Carolina and all of these different places, Chip Lindsey came up through the high school ranks. So that should help him relate a lot more and understand, like, how can I mold this guy to be as ready as fast as possible? I have to imagine, regardless of bringing in Mikey Keene via the transfer portal for Michigan, that's the scenario that they want the most, is what can we do to get Bryce Underwood ready for day one? Is it going to happen? You just can't count on it. I mean, Trevor Lawrence wasn't the guy day one. It was Kelly Bryant. Tua Tagovailoa didn't end up being the guy at Alabama until the national championship game, late in that game, because it was Jalen Hurts before that. So no, you can't necessarily count on it. It's going to have to be like, who's going to make the least mistakes and the right reads. And those are parts of things that Bryce Underwood's going to have to learn. And it's a different level at the high school level, at the college level than it is the high school level. So that's where it'll be interesting to see where that goes. All right, that's going to do it for episode 1. We are going to do a defensive one. Look out for that. It will also be out today. We're just jamming you full of content. We will talk to you again soon. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Peace.